This is Jack Haas. I'm the National PTS for Office 365 on the channel development team. We do have a guest speaker here today, Shane Koenig, who is the National Azure PTS Partner Technology Strategist on our channel development team as well. We will be recording this session today, so you can expect it up on our YouTube channel after the session closes. I will be monitoring the chat window today, so if you have any questions during the session, don't hesitate to ask. We'll do my best to provide that information back to Shane as he does the session, and we'll try to answer the questions during the session. But today we're going to be doing an introduction to Windows Azure and cover some of the recent announcements. And I know Shane has a lot of content here today, so we're going to say that at the end of the session, if time permits, we might have time to chat a little bit about some of the integration points with Office 365. So with that, Shane, I guess the floor is yours.
Thanks for that great introduction, Jack. And welcome everybody to our session today. So we're going to be doing kind of a high-level overview of Azure, kind of where it's.
I'll be there, and I'll give you a heads up.
Where it started, and kind of where we're going, as well as kind of some of the new functionality that's been introduced recently, and kind of, some of the possibilities that are coming up for next year. And we'll be also going over some sales scenarios and a few other things. So with that, we'll just kind of jump right in and get started.
I mean, it's just trying to clarify. They currently have 3, so will it support 3 or not?
So what is Windows Azure? It is unlimited possibilities. It's an open, flexible cloud platform. And it allows you to build and deploy applications as well as virtual machines in an environment that is very scalable and, of course, has a lot of disaster recovery and high availability built into it. It's always up, it's always on. Windows Azure has a guaranteed 99.95 SLA on any service that is replicated. So basically, to garner that, you do have to have your normal high availability 2 machines doing the same role. But you can obviously take those 2 machines, you can put them into a cloud service and load balance them to get your guaranteed 99.95 uptime, which is 5 minutes a month, basically. There's automatic OS and service level patching of the hosts, and basically your requirement on the infrastructure as a service side is just to maintain the operating systems of your own virtual machines and your own solutions. Windows Azure is an open platform, so if you work with development, if you do development yourself or work with customers that do customized development, they can actually build their applications on Azure to be cross-platform. There is also a flat-out device programming platform as well, that you basically design your device application one time, and it will work on all 3 current phone operating systems. So you have unlimited servers and unlimited storage. Obviously, the scalability of the Azure platform is huge. You can spin up a new server in less than 10 minutes. And basically, if you need to add more power to that application, you can spin up another server, you can tie them together, load balance them, and work in that way. Storage is kind of the same concept. You basically will not run out of disk space. As your system grows, you can add more disk space to it as needed, and you can expand your drives on your systems manually at any time. Of course, Microsoft pushes cloud on your terms, and this is kind of a little bit of the roadmap of where things were and where it's going. So basically, you have your physical and virtualization environments. Those are the historical environment and considered on-prem, where you have the full control over everything. If you look down at the bottom there of the of the actual orange and blue box, you'll see that you actually control the application, the operating system, the hardware. You have to take care of the heating, the cooling. You have to provide the rack space and the data center, conditions for everything. Eventually, some new technologies appeared, and of course you have infrastructure as a service, which just went live on Windows Azure last year in June. And then there's platform as a service. That's been running on Windows Azure since the inception of the platform. And of course, we have software as a service, which is Office 365. So in the software as a service model, you have to control who accesses your applications, but you have no responsibility for maintaining the application, the operating system of the machines it's running on, the hardware, or the costs of any of the heating, cooling, or rack space. In the platform as a service model, you still have control of your application and have to maintain it, as well as providing access and taking care of the data, but we take care of the operating system and the hardware. And of course, in infrastructure as a service, which is going to be, the virtual machine environment, you would have control of the application and the operating system on the virtual machine, but Microsoft takes care of the operating system on the hosts, patching the hosts, and takes care of any, hardware problems or outages. Now, kind of where things are moving today is hybrid cloud. Historically, the majority of businesses have been on-prem, and everybody is kind of starting to move now to get a footprint in the cloud. And by hybrid cloud, that's a connection between the public cloud offerings, either Office 365 or Windows Azure, back, in conjunction with your on-premise installation that you currently have, and creating a hybrid cloud model. And talking about the data center, this is a picture of inside one of the Azure data centers. They have the current modular design that has been a big push for large companies today. And what you see over there, the white boxes are basically like a semi-trailer container. And inside, there's just racks and racks of servers along the walls and the middle. And there's obviously a SAN in each one. And they plug it right into the floor and get power. There's actually power grid, running up and connecting right into those boxes, and they stack them too high. So if they need to actually, change out the hardware or do an upgrade, they just they pull that box out, bring in the new one, put it in place. It's actually really neat and very cost-efficient design. This is actually inside one of the containers. You can see the just racks and racks of servers. There's a little, walkway on each side for them to get around inside. The buildings themselves are highly secured on the outside as well, and security controlled through badges, as well as if anybody needs to come in, they actually weigh them on the way in and out. It's a very very neat. So where is Windows Azure data centers? The global data centers, which just popped up in those little gray buttons, are located in those areas. Now, those are the primary data centers for Windows Azure. So you see there's 4 in the US, 2 in Europe, there's 4 in Southeast Asia, 1 in Australia. So the global support for Azure is running 24/7, 365. There's over 1 billion customers. They're in 76 markets today, and 280 years of combined industry experience. So these are the local account teams across the globe and where they are located. Now, these local areas also are the local data centers, basically, that are the backup for the primaries. So depending on which data center you have your services running in the primary data center, that will determine where you go in the local backup data centers. And also it takes into account whether you're using geolocated storage or local storage.
I will be at the office for the rest of the day, but I'll be on the road, so you can contact me. All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye. Okay.
So IaaS, infrastructure services. Basically, you create a virtual network, you create your virtual machines, you attach storage, you actually set it up just like you would set it up, on premise. You have to carefully design your actual virtual network so that you can get the correct routing, and you can set up a site-to-site VPN from your virtual network back to your on-prem data center to create that hybrid design that we were talking about earlier. And there's our VPN. So the portability. Basically, you can actually take a Hyper-V system today that's running on premise. You can upload the VHD file using a PowerShell script or utilizing System Center, and you can actually run that machine in Azure. You can also take a machine running in Azure today and download that VHD file and run it in one of your local Hyper-V systems in your data center. So you have that portability. That's a neat graphic, but it kind of shows exactly what I'm talking about. You can take those virtual hard disks, and under storage, that's what they are, VHD files. You can move them back and forth.
Before you go any further there, Shane, I did get one question. Do you have multiple NICs per VM?
We do not have multiple NICs per VM today, but I do know that in the competition with AWS, that is a much requested item, and I know absolutely that is in their top 5 things that they're working on today and expect to be released sometime this year. I'm being told sooner rather than later, but I don't have an actual release date yet. Were there any other questions?
Nope, that'd be it right now.
Okay. So, your virtual networking, you actually have the ability to VPN machine to machine. You also have the ability to site-to-site VPN into your virtual network. You can create your virtual network with multiple IP ranges, and you can put machines on the different subnets just like you can do on-prem using a hardware solution. It handles the routing itself via internal software routing, but the machines on one virtual network can all talk to each other just as you would expect. So that's showing your site-to-site VPN and also your ability to have a laptop or a desktop machine VPN into your subscription and get access to resources. It's the site-to-site versus the point-to-site VPN. And you configure that all through the virtual networking piece. So we talked a little bit earlier about high availability, and this will actually explain how that works, how you get your 99.95 SLA. So if you have a web server, with a particular machine name, and it has that internal IP address.
While we have a little break there, we did have one question a little bit back talking about are there private cloud options for IaaS?
There's not a true, obviously it's a shared system. So the way that it actually works, your all of your applications, your servers, everything are segregated into your subscription. Your subscription actually prevents other subscriptions from talking to it. So you are segregated, but it is still in a shared environment. There's no way at this point today to actually lease, like a rack of servers just for yourself. And I don't know if that will ever be the case, but and I apologize. Okay, so were there any other questions, Jack?
Nope, that'd be it. Sorry
Okay.
for the blip there.
That's all right. I'm not sure how I got muted, but we'll get back on track here. So you have your web server, you have your internal IP address, and you have your, the machines all have an external IP address also. But what you can do to prevent them from being contacted is you can actually put them in a cloud service and actually create an endpoint to that machine so that only that port is visible to the outside world. In the case of a website, obviously port 80. So you determine that you want to have high availability. You create a second machine, and obviously there is its internal IP address. You create the same endpoint on that machine, and you have them in the cloud service. And you can actually, so everything coming in on port 80 will route to whichever system is the least busy. There is a software load balancer that operates in there, and then port, obviously on the second machine, port 1433 is open as well, but only to that machine. Then you put the two machines in an availability set. What that does is it moves them to different hosts in different containers within the data center. And what that does is at some time during the night and at one point during the month, the host machines have to actually be patched. And this will guarantee that both machines will not be restarted at the same time. The other thing that it gives you is if you need to do patching or something on those machines, you can actually take the one machine offline, do your patching, and the other machine will get all the requests, just like you would expect with an actual hardware load balancer on-prem. Another area that has seen growth in recent times is in recovery services. There's two pieces to Windows Azure Recovery Services. The first piece is Azure Online Backup, and the second piece is the Hyper-V Recovery Console. Now, both of those features have gone GA just recently, but Azure Online Backup integrates with Server 2012, Server 2012 Essentials, and Data Protection Manager, the Data Protection Manager of System Center 2012 R2. So it will integrate with those. You create a backup vault. It's protected by certificates, and you can easily configure a backup source to back up from on-site up to the cloud with that model. The Hyper-V Recovery Console is another really nice feature that actually helps you manage your on-premise Hyper-V systems and actually can help move those systems from one of your data centers to another of your data centers in the event that you have a failure. So basically it backs up your machines in the one data center, it stores metadata about those machines in Azure, and it ties into Virtual Machine Manager so that you can see and actually control when the backups and everything occur, and you can actually do the failover yourself, or it will do an automatic failover based off your Virtual Machine Manager policies, utilizing the metadata that it's storing up on Windows Azure. So there you have your backup to the cloud. So you can extend, your legacy and hybrid applications as well. there's a lot of customer pains. They have to replace machines. They have to actually try to upgrade their data center because they don't have sufficient heating and cooling, and they need to add more services. They have to buy hardware, and they need, they need to expose their internal environment to the outside. So, how you can kind of envision selling this is wrapping your service around Windows Azure. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can do cloud assessments. You can help design their implementation. You can do implementation preparations. You can help them do lifecycle management of their systems. You can provide technical support. You can, build your application and tie it to Azure and sell it. So the way that you make money through that is through system integration services, kind of just what I was talking about, planning, designing, implementing, doing testing for them, and then through channel incentives through Microsoft. The Windows Azure platform today is actually a modified version of Windows Server 2012. The virtual machine side of the house actually runs off of Hyper-V, just like you do on-prem. It's managed by a modified version of System Center that actually does things like proactive analysis, of the hardware and things like that. And of course, keeping in mind that modernizing your apps, if you are working with application development, does not have to be a wholesale move. It's a proven business strategy for MSPs. The actual platform side of Azure has been around since 2008, whereas infrastructure as a service was just released this last year. And also, it's good to be aware that not everything should be hosted in Azure necessarily. So the workloads and scenarios. So what are we seeing today as far as our top workloads? In the upper left, you have Windows Azure IIS for test and development. The pain points there for developers as well as for people that are doing testing is they end up with the old machines, the machines that are going to be written off the books. A lot of times they're old hardware that probably has something wrong with it. It isn't as powerful as the hardware that the application is going to be running on. It doesn't give real-time data. And also, it's harder to actually replicate those systems for version control and testing. So with Windows Azure, you can actually do version control because you can take and actually make a copy of that VHD file, and you can launch it. You can actually make another image of that, another image as you revision things out, and you can have many different revisions of your application. And you're getting real-time, real-speed machines. The cost point also can be cheaper with those systems because you can actually shut them down when they're not in use. You can have different deployments running at different times of the day even to reduce costs.
Sounds good.
So in the gray box below that, we have application migration to Windows Azure. So where we're seeing this a lot is actually with on-premise website-based businesses, as well as things that you can put on Azure utilizing remote desktop services. I've seen people migrate everything from applications based off SQL Server all the way up to things like QuickBooks or GP, and utilize RDS to host the heavy clients for those systems. Another area that's been rapidly growing is SharePoint on Windows Azure IaaS. The SharePoint SKU was actually modified with the Internet connector to make it the price point more in line with what, so even if you have customers accessing that from the Internet, it is a lot cheaper to run today than it was in the past. But, the problem that people run into, and there's a determining factor too, of running SharePoint on Windows Azure versus IaaS versus running it on Office 365. The product on Office 365 is a great product, but the problem with it is it's a little hard to do any custom dev on that platform because you don't have access to the application. So if you're using a lot of third parties, you're doing some custom dev, on your SharePoint site, then we generally want you to run it on a virtual machine versus utilizing the one that's up in Office 365. So probably one of the biggest areas where you can get a really quick footprint into a customer is utilizing the cloud integrated storage and backup to the cloud. We talked about that a little bit. There's actually enterprise class solutions like StoreSimple and Commvault that have policy-based hardware that you keep on-prem that actually backs up to Azure after a certain amount of time. There's also the smaller versions like ArcServe that allows you to back up to the cloud. There's a SQL Server to Windows Azure backup tool that's out there that you can download and install on any SQL Server that's 2005 or greater. But a lot of different options, for people. The big pain points there with backup is, the off-site storage. My past life, I worked for a subsidiary of McDonald's, and we used to actually have our carrier that came and picked up our tapes every day. And I mean, if something went down in the middle of the night and you had to do a restore, it was always kind of a nightmare. There was a charge for the guy to get up and go get that tape and bring it to us. With this, everything is backed up right to Azure. You have access to it immediately. You don't have those offsite storage costs, and it's always available. Next, in the upper right-hand corner, basically SQL Server and Business Intelligence. So today you can actually set up a clustered SQL environment on Windows Azure. You can also use Hadoop to dig through that SQL data to find trends, in your customer base, as well as, it'll do automatic reporting on things that it finds as far as trends. So is something selling better in the southeast part of the United States better than the northwest? Things like that. It'll help you answer those kind of questions and kind of where you should be focusing on what, I guess, on what products in certain areas even. And there you can actually lease the SQL software from Microsoft today, as well as if you have SA on your SQL Server, you can migrate that SQL Server to Windows Azure in that model. And then finally, a little bit of what we're talking about there with Jack, ADFS on Windows Azure. There's also an option for password synchronization on Azure, tying back to your local domain. If all you're using today is Office 365, the actual password sync option is a really attractive option because it uses less servers. But ADFS will provide a fully single sign-on environment to Office 365, but also to other applications, and it will give you the real uptime and high availability by running it on Azure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add there, we do have a video on our YouTube channel talking about that password synchronization. I'll be posting that link in the chat window, so if anybody wants to check that out, they're welcome to.
So just a little more about the infrastructure services sales scenarios. There's a lot of course, catchy value prop phases, right? Bring it, we run it. But scalable infrastructure for your apps. You create the app. If you create it with Microsoft technology in mind, it will run on Azure. You can scale that application. There are ways, if you are running it on web and worker roles, that you can actually automatically scale up and down extra instances based on how busy your website is. Running SQL Server in the cloud. I've worked with a lot of great SQL partners. They've been selling a lot of actual replication to a SQL Server on Azure. and using that SQL Server on Azure as their backup instead of having a backup in-house. So if that in-house cluster goes down, they can just redirect their application over the VPN, connect to their SQL Server in Azure, and run. And that's kind of a nice footprint also, and a good way to get your foot in the door. A lot of times after a while, they'll actually just move that application up to Azure once they're comfortable with the SQL Server running in the cloud. People are always worried about performance and things, but SQL Server has been fully certified, fully tested. The read-writes speeds are great, and the performance is excellent. Running SharePoint apps in the cloud. So obviously the customization and collaboration. You can customize that installation, install any third-party products. You have your hybrid infrastructure with single identity. So you've got single sign-on with ADFS. You've got your hybrid data center design with your connection to Azure. There is one other important note also to note that if you're concerned and you want just instead of having the site-to-site VPN, if you want a real-time connection to Azure, you can actually get that today through AT&T. They have an MPLS solution, and Microsoft has an agreement with them where via MPLS they'll extend your Azure subscription into your data center in real time using the MPLS routing. So it's real-time flexible tests and development environments. I showed you a little bit about that, but I mean you can even use the power of PowerShell to bring up and take down an environment. And when the environment's down, that customer's not getting billed for that, so they can cut down on their consumption costs. And the billing on a virtual machine today is by the minute. So every minute that it's not running and it's in a deallocated state, you're not getting billed for anything but a small charge for the data storage of the VHD file. So this is just another little summary slide, but there is a scalable on-demand infrastructure in the cloud. I talked a little bit about how the storage scales. I talked how you can scale your application across multiple virtual machines or web and worker roles. I mean, basically, you can add new machines at any time. You can add more disk space at any time and make the configuration changes you need at any time. You can also control who has access to your subscription. So there's a growing list of validated and supported workloads. There is a TechNet FAQ out there that we can provide to you that actually shows the Microsoft workloads that are supported. But there are some other third parties that are supported too. For example, we do support Linux. So if you have Linux customers or you do any kind of Linux work, you can spin up a copy of Linux in the cloud, excluding Red Hat. There's a licensing issue there with them, but we do have CentOS, Ubuntu, Gentoo, all the major name brands. We also have an agreement with Oracle. So not only can you run SQL Server in the cloud, you can run Oracle on the Azure platform. And then in our application, our actual application area inside the portal, you can spin up any number of applications pre-built, creating blogs or websites for different things. But there's a lot of power, and a lot of it has been, pre-customized and is ready to go. You can connect, extend Active Directory, into the cloud, and still have that connection back to on-prem. So you have your backup, but having AD in the cloud supports your applications you want to deploy in the cloud. So, I mean, that's great. You can manage the whole thing with System Center. System Center is a great product, new features being added to it all the time, and new functionality, and they're integrating, Windows Azure, in the process of really integrating that with System Center today. You can actually use System Center to migrate, an on-prem virtual machine up to Azure. It's really, really nice. And you can use Data Protection Manager to back up not only your machines in Azure, but also your on-prem machines. So a lot of good features there. And, they're integrating Windows Azure App Data and Storage Services. What that speaks to is the fact that you can create a web application on web and worker roles on the platform as a service side. You can still leverage the power of SQL Server on the infrastructure as a service side, tie that solution together as one solution. So, when you're selling, you're trying to sell a project to a customer, you're not actually selling them Azure. You're actually selling them on the project, and you run the project on Azure. It's actually a really, really neat way to go. So, there's very powerful capabilities. The Windows Azure Fabric and Fabric, the Fabric controller is what handles all the load balancing features. And, you have your compute, your storage. It talks a little there about what I was mentioning, your web role and worker role instances over a load balancer back to your storage. And of course, leveraging Hadoop to do your data mining and intelligence. So kind of what's new in Windows Azure today, what has kind of come around in the last few months? So they integrated new high memory instances. Anybody that's actually using Azure today has probably seen those machines sitting in there. They're the A5, A6, and A7 machines. They were designed basically for SQL Server and for remote desktop services. There was a lot of customer demands around that. Just recently, Windows Azure completed some new certifications. So we did get FedRAMP certified, which is a federal government group that actually does a lot of testing on cloud services and other platforms to make sure that they're security compliant enough for federal government companies. And so if you have companies that work with federal government or have a federal government, grant or something, and they have to have a federal certification to be able to run in the cloud, we've got that. We just recently became PCI and DSS compliant. We passed the level 1 compliance. It took a year and a half to get that. But now today we can do full out PCI. And then the UKG cloud is kind of to the United Kingdom what FedRAMP is to the United States. But that was another certification that we recently passed. It's the UK government has approved Windows Azure to be their cloud of choice. So we also have big data disk delivery. It's still in preview, but that is going to be a service that's going to be released where if you have, terabytes of data that you need to upload to Azure, you don't have to copy that over the internet. All you have to do is actually copy it to a disk or a set of disks, BitLocker those disks, overnight them to us. We will load that data for you. Traffic Manager was just released. What Traffic Manager actually gave us was the ability to load balance. So in a cloud service, you do load balancing between two systems. With Traffic Manager, you can actually load balance between two cloud services in two different data centers. So you could have one cloud service in the west data center, one in the east data center, and you could load balance traffic across Traffic Manager between the two Azure data centers. And if one of those cloud services goes down, all the traffic goes to the other one while that's down. So it kind of gives you just another level of high availability and disaster recovery.
Hey Shane, before you go any further, could you talk a little bit about maybe any information on compliance around the government cloud, HIPAA compliance, for example?
HIPAA compliance we have had for a long time. There is some stuff around that that I can talk about a little bit, but we are HIPAA compliant. To get the HIPAA compliance, though, you are required to get an EA, and the reason for that is it's around the legality of everything. Obviously, patient data, things like that, are kind of big news nowadays. We don't want people stealing that stuff, and obviously it's against the law. So we do have HIPAA compliance. You do need to get an EA for that. Once you do that, Microsoft and you will sign a contract. They will guarantee HIPAA compliance. We have some large vendors today I have one customer that actually created a software solution that actually these people have home monitoring systems, and they basically take that data, upload it all into Azure today. And he bought the EA. He has the HIPAA compliance guarantee, and that's kind of how that works. But so we do offer that. Go ahead, Jack. Was there any other questions?
No, it's just another question about the HIPAA compliance. Is
Okay.
documentation for HIPAA compliance with an EA required for Office 365? Yeah, that would be it. Any kind of point within that process, you do have the HIPAA compliance on Office 365. You would likely need that additional compliance documentation for Azure if you have anything on Azure as well. So I think that covers the compliance questions at this point, Shane.
Okay, great. So we covered Traffic Manager, TFS Online, the Foundation Services Online moved to Visual Studio Online and is now running on Azure. So if you want to utilize that service, you used to just go to tfsonline.com. Now you actually have to go onto Azure, create an Azure subscription, sign up for a Visual Studio Online account, or if you have a TFS Online account today, you can utilize that same account, get the same service. It's just now it's going to be hosted on Azure versus where it was hosted before. And then the Hyper-V Recovery Console, we talked about that a little bit. That's a great feature. It integrates with Virtual Machine Manager, allows you to back up your virtual machines that are on-prem, and basically migrate those machines to another one of your data centers in case of a failure. Then there's the SQL Server to Azure backup tool. That tool is, you can download and install on any of your customer SQL servers. They do have to have an Azure subscription, of course, to utilize that, but very easy to use. The backups work just like doing a regular SQL backup through the Enterprise console. You configure it the same way. And then, of course, what's coming down the pipeline for Windows Azure, we did speak about that a little bit. They just released a static IP option, so you can get static IPs now on your virtual machines, but there's going to be a lot more things coming around, internal networking. We'll see some improvements there. A lot of it is in direct two things: partner requests and also competition, obviously, with AWS. So, that's kind of where things are headed today. And there will be some major, we've seen a lot of really nice updates over the last 6 months, but I think in the next 6 we're going to see some really cool things coming out. So I'm excited about it, and I hope you all are too. So that wraps up my deck, but are there any other questions today?
Yeah, we just had a couple outstanding as you were presenting there, Shane. So if you give me a second, I'll roll back here.
Sure.
To find it. We had one question around if you could expand a little bit around the advantages of Azure over private cloud, the cost, the maintenance, efficiency, etc.
Sure. Basically, I have talked to many hosting providers. We actually have a hosting EWA that can be purchased, where they can actually resell Azure themselves. And a lot of those providers have realized that they can't compete at that price point. I mean, a small virtual machine on Azure, our most expensive pricing is 9 cents an hour. And, the cost of keeping up with upgrades and, the competition basically of private cloud, against Azure, you don't have to worry about the power. You don't have to worry about heating and cooling. You don't have to have an expert that knows how to configure SANs and all of that hardware. You just have to have people that know how to manage the operating systems. It's a totally different animal. And a lot of the the MSPs that we work with are actually starting now to do their hosting in Azure versus even doing it in their own data center. And they're starting to migrate a lot of they're either going to migrate those customers that are in their local data center today to Azure eventually, or else they're just going to leave them in their data center until it's time to start replacing hardware. And they're just not going to go that way. I just even talked to one managed service provider yesterday that was in the planning stages of building another data center, and they canceled it and started migrating all of their customers to Azure. So, as far as the price point and things like that, that's kind of what I'm seeing, I guess, is just most of them are saying it's just more cost effective to use Azure than it really is to do it themselves anymore.
Well, thanks for that. Then we did have a couple questions around compatibility. Store Simple, Exagrid, StorageCraft. Are you familiar with those solutions, and are they compatible with Azure?
I'm familiar with Store Simple. Obviously, we own that, and it is fully compatible with Windows Azure out of the box. So if you have an Azure subscription, you actually configure it through the Store Simple console, but you create a backup vault, and you set up your policies, and then, of course, for the first 3 months, it keeps you on SSDs. Then it moves you to, after 3 months, to SAS drives. After 6 months, it moves you to the cloud, or however you want to design it. And it handles the management of all that data. The other solutions, I honestly am not too familiar with. I know Commvault and Store Simple do out of the box will work with Azure. Many other products will, and it's highly possible that there are some out there I haven't heard of before. So the two that I work with almost daily are Commvault and Store Simple.
Could you give the audience a little idea as to, we mentioned about the enterprise agreements and HIPAA compliance. When it comes to Azure, what price does should they start considering an EA for those type of deployments?
Gotcha. Well, the minimum that you can get an EA for is $25,000. Along with that, though, there's a lot of things out there on Azure. So if you get an EA, you're going to get a 20% discount also off the EA price, just so that you're aware. But that's what it costs, and so that is kind of, it is a lot of money. I do understand that, but I guess where else we would like to go about that.
Sure. And then I guess the last question here in the chat window is around Windows 7, Windows 8 on Azure for VDI.
VDI today is not supported. There's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, not having multiple NICs is one thing. The other thing is a licensing concern over how to track the licensing of those products, and is it going to have to be more of a lease kind of a thing versus a volume licensing thing? And pretty much like with RDS and with Office today, you have to buy those through SPLA. That's kind of where that went, and I don't know. I know they did some testing on VDI with Azure. We did some internal testing. I don't know what the result of that was, or when we will see VDI, or if we will at this point. But it's pretty good if you look out at the market and see what's kind of available on our competition. That we're going to be heading in those directions at some point.
And then we had another one pop in. Does Azure offer SDN for IaaS?
Hold on here 1 second.
So as Shane takes a look at that, we just want to take a moment to thank everybody for joining the session today. Keep an eye out on our Yammer page, the channel development team Yammer page. You can find that link within the long discussion that has been going on in the chat area. Next, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nope,
I have an answer for that question. I apologize there. Basically, how it works is, when you set up your server, it gets a public IP address and it gets a public URL. That name is specific to your server. You can access the server over that URL. You could even do a DNS, redirect to whatever you want to call it, and get access to that machine from the outside if you have the right ports open and the right configuration, obviously. So that does work that way. And that can't be, I'm trying to think if that can be changed. No, it can't be changed. So when you create the machine, the actual SPN is listed in the dashboard. It gives you the full URL and how to connect to the machine.
Well, thanks for this, Shane. I know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us today. We're kind of running to the top of the hour, so we'll be posting some additional information on the channel development team's Yammer page. You can find those links in the chat window in this long chat discussion that's been going on. Thanks for the participation there. It's been some great discussions within the chat window. We will also have this session recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. You can also find the link to that in the chat window. We really appreciate your time, and we hope we see everyone on our next session, as we will have special guests from Yammer. We'll be doing a session with the Yammer team, talking about the functionality and introduction to Yammer, especially Yammer Enterprise, and some of the integration with SharePoint Online and how we can better leverage Yammer for some of that collaboration functionality. So until then, thanks again, Shane, for your time today.
No problem. It's always a pleasure, and thanks everybody for coming. I hope you found the information useful, and if you do have any other questions that come to mind after the presentation, feel free to let Jack know, and we will get something back to you as soon as possible.
Yep. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.